Kiran Kaur Gill, thank you so much for being with us on ITV Gold here. You are representing SALDEF. You are the executive director of a great nonprofit. I hope you're doing well.
Thank you. Yes, I'm doing very well. Thank you.
You know, we have lots to discuss on the show today, Kiran. There's so much happening in the nation, and I know SALDEF has been very vocal and supportive of a lot of causes. But just before beginning the show and discussing more on that, I'd like for our viewers to get to know SALDEF a little bit more. So for just the viewers that may not know about SALDEF, could you give us a little brief insight into all of its programs and how it's one of the biggest advocacy groups for South Asian Americans in the country?
Absolutely. So SALDEF stands for the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund. It's actually the oldest Sikh American advocacy group in the United States. And our focus is on civil rights, religious freedoms, as well as civic engagement for the Sikh American community. We worked on a number of different initiatives, from uniform accommodations with the military and law enforcement to working closely with the FBI and EEOC on issues of workplace discrimination, harassment, and hate crimes. And we worked extensively on civic engagement within the Sikh American community, ensuring the community is aware of policy and legislation that affects the community, that they're engaged, that they're registered to vote. And we also have a program called the Sikh Lead Program, where we train and develop young Sikh Americans to be the next generation of leaders and community advocates.
That's great. And, you know, just looking at COVID-19 now, how have your programs transformed over these last couple of months? And there are legal, policy, and education resources available through SALDEF. Are all of these resources still in process?
Absolutely. So like many organizations, we've changed to a virtual model. We've done a number of different webinars on topics related to COVID and also related to civil rights and civic engagement. We have resources online, and our programs like our Sikh Lead programs, where we actually have college-age students that do legislative internships on Capitol Hill. Typically every year it's in person, but this year we're actually running a virtual internship. So we have interns from across the country learning how government works, learning how to become advocates, but doing this experience virtually. So it's a new area for us, but it's been a really interesting experience over the last couple of months.
This pandemic has brought a lot in conversation and in discussion as well. In terms of looking at the impact of this pandemic and the resources and the changes you might have had to make, what has been your focus with SALDEF currently during this pandemic?
So we continue to focus on our core mission, which is civil rights, religious freedoms, and community engagement and civic engagement. But in addition to that, we've been offering resources for the community on COVID. So we had webinars on COVID and mental health issues. We had webinars on COVID and the business impacts of COVID, and looking at resources such as the PPP loans. We have resources available online about how COVID affects Gurdwaras reopening and how to be safe, whether that's at home or in a Gurdwara setting. So there's a number of resources that we've added and for the community so that they can get through this very difficult time. But we continue to be active in our programs. We've been actively providing information and resources about census. We're gearing up for Sikh Vote, which is our program to ensure that our community is engaged in voting. So we continue to run our programs. And as I mentioned, the Sikh Lead program is a virtual program this year. So we continue to fill our mission, but again, in a different way during this very unique time.
Yes, for sure. In terms of looking at the Sikh American community, because SALDEF works so closely in representing the voices of the Sikh American community and also their perspective, what, according to you, has been the impact of this pandemic specifically on Sikh Americans?
So for Sikh Americans, we've had the recent FBI hate crime statistics from 2018 came out. Hate crimes against Sikh Americans has risen 200% over the course of the last round of FBI statistics. So we've seen an increase with hate crimes, but we've seen that, before the pandemic, and I think that continues. And I know we'll be talking later about the recent hate crime in New Mexico. So unfortunately, that is a reality for a community. But what we've also seen through this pandemic is something that's really important to the community is service, seva. And one of the ways that we perform seva and we live out our values is through langar, which is providing a free meal where everybody eats together, and providing service and resources for those in need. And it's been amazing that the Sikh community has really come together across the country to provide langar and provide food for frontline workers and for those that are most hardest hit by this pandemic. And I think that's been an incredible way that we could help out by living out our faith and by looking at the needs of the community and providing, using the resources that we have. A lot of gurdwaras have very large community kitchens and are used to feeding large groups of people and using, those skills and resources for the larger community.
This 200% increase on hate crime and just a general conversation on what's happening to the community that's being targeted, what would you attribute this 200% rise in?
I think we're living in a time where it's more and more divisive. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversations about immigrants. There's been talk, and I think that immigrants in many ways have been vilified. It's been a sort of a political football. So I think that has been one of the things that's attributed, that I think is attributes to this rise in hate crimes that we see, because we've seen the rise in hate crimes from the last couple of years, in this last political cycle.
For sure. In terms of just discussing more hate crime and what is happening with the Sikh American community, let's actually talk about what happened in New Mexico in Santa Fe. A Sikh-owned restaurant called India Place was vandalized, and there were white supremacist messages all over. The entire place was basically, impacted. Could you give us an insight into exactly what has happened and what has been SALDEF's measure since that incident?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, this hate crime happened last Monday. Baljeet Singh, who's a Sikh American, was a restaurant owner in Santa Fe, New Mexico. His restaurant was vandalized, and that can mean many things, but just to give folks a gravity of the situation, it's estimated of $100,000 worth of damages. And in addition, there was white supremacist language and xenophobic language graffitied all over the restaurant with things like white power, Trump 2020, go home, and some other words that I probably should not repeat on your show. So it was certainly, an extremely sad and horrific incident. SALDEF last Wednesday held a press conference in New Mexico with state and local officials denouncing white supremacy, denouncing this type of incident, and standing in solidarity with the restaurant owner. And in addition, we've been in touch with the FBI, local law enforcement, and the Attorney General's office to ensure that this incident gets thoroughly investigated and the perpetrators are brought to justice. And we'll continue to do that and inform the community of developments on this case.
Kiran, we continuously keep on seeing these kind of incidents happen to South Asians all over. In terms of these people that are conducting these heinous acts, what would you say to them?
I would say, we're all Americans, and as a community, we need to come together. These type of acts are divisive, they're unnecessary, and I think, the Sikh community and the Sikh, Sikh philosophy is one of oneness, one of community. So, my message to the perpetrators is, you really need to understand, the community better, and that we're stronger together ultimately. Right. And to the FBI and to law enforcement, my message is, let's find these people and let's bring these perpetrators to justice, because these are things that shouldn't be happening and there should be consequences.
Right, and it's happening right smack in the middle of a pandemic. You wouldn't even think somebody would act in such a manner. Let's talk now about what has happened with the entire Black Lives Matter movement and the demonstrations nationwide. I know SALDEF has given its support for the movement, as well as they stand in solidarity with them. I'd like for you to address systemic racism and these conversations we keep on having these days, and how important is this entire movement for even South Asian entities such as like us?
So absolutely. No, and as you mentioned, SALDEF does stand in support of Black Lives Matter, and we stand in solidarity with the peaceful protesters across the country. Yeah. This is incredibly important. So SALDEF is a civil rights organization. Right. And what that means is we stand up not only for civil rights of Sikh Americans, but for all Americans. And it's incredibly important that we stand in solidarity with our Black brothers and sisters. Equality is a fundamental part of the Sikh religion. And, it's our duty to stand up for those that are oppressed. And as we can see from the videos of George Floyd and so many others, equality is not something that's afforded to everybody in this country, and it needs to be. As far as South Asian and Sikh Americans, we owe an extreme debt of gratitude for those folks that have come before us in the civil rights movement. We would not have the rights and the freedoms and the opportunities we have today had it not been for the efforts of the African American community and those that have come before us. Definitely. So this is something that SALDEF will be continuing to work for and advocate for issues and policies that support equality in this country.
What do you believe is the responsibility of elected officials right now with all the nationwide demonstrations? I mean, we've seen these demonstrations in other parts of the world as well. What is needed in terms of changing the system?
So I think right now the responsibility of elected officials is really to listen to what people are saying, and listen to what people are saying they need, and come up with solutions. And those policies should be oriented with an eye towards equality and social justice. And I think that's something that is really needed. And I think that it's important for our community to understand what those policies are and help to push those forward.
In terms of looking at immigrant rights as well as justice and identity, what has been SALDEF's response to the Supreme Court DACA ruling, which protects over 700,000 immigrants from being deported?
Yes, absolutely. So SALDEF is 100% in support of DACA, and we believe that there should be a process to streamline those individuals that are in the DACA program to be afforded full citizenship. So we've been very involved in this issue from the start, and we're happy to see the Supreme Court ruling in that case.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
In looking at all of the things that we've discussed so far, Kiran, and I know you sort of reflected upon this, and it is a part of SALDEF's mission, which is voter education and getting our community to participate. What do you say to the community right now that is watching everything, and we have elections coming in November? How important is for us to advocate our voice?
It is extremely important. The presidential election this year it's of extreme importance. All presidential elections are, but the presidential election sets the tone and direction for the country. And I would say to all my fellow Sikh Americans, South Asian Americans, and all Americans, it is important that we all go out and vote, get registered, go out and vote. Every vote counts, and your voice counts. And if you want to be a part of deciding the direction of this country, it is important. One of the first steps in that is to vote. So I would say it is extremely important, and something that we all need to be focusing on this year.
Definitely. The importance of voting, we cannot stress it enough. I hope people go out and vote. On a positive note, I'd love for you to give us some information on the first observant Sikh American female graduate from the West Point. I know the community is super proud. I know SALDEF is too. Just a little bit insight into what took to get her approved.
So yeah, we are super excited. As you mentioned, she's the first observant female Sikh graduate of West Point, a second lieutenant colonel. We worked for years on working with the military and law enforcement on uniform accommodation policies. So we were very happy to see, see this development. A lot of the uniform accommodation policies have been with males. So this is the first Sikh female that has graduated from West Point, and we're just excited to see what she goes on to do in her career.
How important was this to get that identity seen in the military? According to you, what does that show for the community?
So I think it shows the community that Sikhs are part of the diversity of America. The military represents America in so many ways, and this just is another step forward in showing that we can participate in all aspects of American society.
Yes, for sure. Well, it was great having you here with us on ITV Gold, Kiran. I'd love for you to give one last message to our audience and perhaps how they can reach the resources of SALDEF.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think probably the biggest takeaway or message I want to leave with your audience is, this is a year of civic engagement. We have some really important things going on, the 2020 census, we have the presidential election. So I just want to say, to all those watching, it's important to be engaged. Obviously, we're living during a pandemic, so I guess the ultimate message would be stay safe and stay engaged. I also want to let folks know that we do have resources available for the census as well as voting online at our website, www.saldef.org, or you can follow us on Instagram at Sikh Americans, or follow us on Facebook at our Facebook page, SALDEF. So we'll be having webinars, we'll be having discussions about voting. The census, we do have resources on both census and voting on our website and on these other social media platforms. So please make sure you follow us, and please make sure, again, to stay engaged.
Yes, for sure. Staying safe and staying engaged. I hope you also stay safe. Thank you so much for your time, Kiran Kaur Gill.
Thank you.